Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Jamie Mustard, a multimedia consultant, teacher, and interdisciplinary artist and designer, as well as the author of The Invisible Machine, which covers somewhat of a miracle treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder, which he explains in this interview should be thought of as post-traumatic stress injury, which has to do with the sympathetic nerve system and rebooting that after periods of increased trauma or stress response. In this conversation, we talk about this treatment and its impact and its import, and Jamie opens up and talks about its influence on his own life growing up in the middle of poverty in East LA, as well as anecdotes of other people who've been affected positively by this treatment and whose PTSD, so-called, has been alleviated or abated or actually cured after this funny little procedure that's been around since the 1920s. If you are interested in more information about this treatment or Jamie's other work, links are all in the description. Without further ado, here is Jamie Mustard. And should I ping Corey?
Is he coming in with us?
I thought so, but I'm totally cool just to pick your brain.
I think we should. I think he wanted me to do it on my own. I kept asking him, and he kept saying, "But up to you. You know, I'm in your hands."
Cool.
Yeah. He speaks incredibly highly of you, by the way. Yeah, and I'm excited, and I'm really thank you for having me.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. He's been speaking about the work that you've been doing. Along with Eugene Lipov, on this crazy new thing. And Corey told me about his story with it, or his experience with this. What? Not a cure, or therapy, or treatment.
Well, I mean, I think it's subtle, but but what it is maybe one of the most. I will say, without hyperbole, that I think it's probably the most important medical invention since the discovery of penicillin. I think it dwarfs the polio vaccine in terms of lives it can save. I think that it is maybe the greatest human innovation since the moon landing. We can reset the nervous system. And there's so many things, I wouldn't call myself anti-woke. I would call myself pro-data, which probably makes me anti-woke, right? Meaning I'm not a big fan of bumper stickers. I'm pretty intersectional. I grew up poor and I'm a mixed person. Yeah. And when I listen to woke people speak, I'm like, they're never from neighborhoods like I grew up in. It's always middle class to upper middle class Black people. I have a cousin that's a very accomplished woke kind of activist and writes policy for BLM. You know what I mean? And I'm kind of proud of her as my cousin, but I also think she's smart, but I'm also so one of the things that we could talk about, I think that a lot of this kind of angry, woke, virtue signaling comes from a dysregulated nervous system, a physiological issue. So that's another thing that we could talk about outside of, things we could talk about in terms of gender dysphoria. And how I think that may be related also to the nervous system.
Yeah. Well, so it's a huge conversation, and well, where would you like to start? Should we do biographical, or one thing that it says in the press release, which I think is really catching. So whoever's doing this press release has really got their head on straight, is that it's kind of challenging the narrative around what post-traumatic stress disorder is, as an injury of the body, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we could start with that. I mean, I don't know your audience. I don't know how quickly you want to get into issues of how the nervous system may relate to these other things. It might, if you think your audience is up for it, it might be good to kind of get into this idea of, and I can explain it very quickly, very powerfully, how post-traumatic stress is 100% a biological injury. And even the most cynical person, we can open up with this, that might be listening. If I kind of give this brief narrative of why we know it's true, nobody could argue with it. We call it a broken leg you can't see, right? And so it's we have all these people walking around with this physical injury in their body, and they act a little crazy because it makes you crazy. and we're telling them that they have a mental disorder. I mean, it's pretty fucked up. That's like to give somebody that stigma when they have a physical condition. Like you wouldn't see somebody with a broken leg and go, "You have broken leg disorder. Get over it. You
Okay.
know, what's wrong with
Yeah.
you? How come you can't pull it together like other people?" Right?
Yeah.
So it's incredibly stigmatizing. We can get into that. I am, interested in talking about it. Like, one of the things that I'm very interested in is, we live at a time where we're marketing to people that it's unsafe to be female. We're marketing this to little girls. I mean, they've never had access to that kind of. Before the internet, little girls were not being told from the time they were 8 years old, 9 years old, 12 years old, 10 years old that it's unsafe to be a woman, right? So I do think that the chronic stress of for young girls being on social media, you can get an overactive sympathetic nervous system, which is a biological injury to your body, and I can explain the science and anatomy of it
Yeah.
from chronic stress. It's actually the more common way of getting it. What they call it prolonged allostatic load. There's guys that come back from Afghanistan and they come back with this thing called operator syndrome. It is really just an overactive sympathetic nervous system. These are guys that maybe they were never even in a firefight. Just the fear of the IED and being away from their families and not coming home, carrying that stress for a year, they will come back with a biological injury to their body. That is the exact same biological injury that I received growing up in poverty near downtown LA. And that is the exact same biological injury that young women are truly young people, but young women are experiencing with social media going onto phones. And that's why we're seeing the preteen suicide rates that we're seeing and all sorts of depression, anxiety, hypervigilance, hyperarousal. It's all a biological injury, and we can get into. I mean, I don't know how deep you want me to go now, so that
Yeah, let's go. Let's go. So,
want,
I like this. I like this line of inquiry. So, how
okay.
is prolonged stress? How does that injure?
Yeah, I mean, listen, when you experience, you have to look at it like what would happen if you were living in the South American jungle 2,000 years ago. Okay. And a puma and a giant puma jumped out at you, a tiger. Okay. Um, your amygdala sends a signal to a gangle of nerves on your neck, right here and here, called the stellate ganglion. That is your sympathetic nervous system. That's where you get when you almost swerve and hit your car, you almost fall. That's that thing that happens where your body goes into stimulus response to catch yourself or to avoid getting into an accident. That's your fight or flight system. Okay. Now, if that, normally when that happens, we're up for about 4 or 5 hours, maybe an hour or two, and then we come back to baseline. Well, if that trauma is too overwhelming, like in a sexual assault, or your buddy seeing his head blown off in front of you, then that system does not come back to baseline. It stays up, and it's actually a survival mechanism. If you think about it, if we all had random reactions to survival, we wouldn't survive as a species. We need to have a homogenous reaction to threat. Okay, so if overwhelming threat changes your biology. I would rather answer that once we're going because like how we know that. It actually changes your biology and you can see it on a brain scan. And with this treatment, you can basically power down the sympathetic nervous system. It powers out 10 minutes later at baseline. You can reset the nervous system to the pre-trauma state. And so it's you can't see it the way you can see a broken leg, but I think as the awareness comes out with this book and everything, it's why I wrote it, was to kind of, it's been at the extreme for 20 years. Obama endorsed it back in 2010. I want to bring it to the living room. Yoga instructors, plumbers, CEOs, teachers. I think that 40 to 50% of the US and global population may be suffering from this injury. And I think in 5 years, this can be people should be getting this the way they're getting LASIK.
So just to recap.
Yeah.
We have a system that allows us to respond in a heightened manner to life-threatening stimuli.
Yes.
Right. But in the modern world with modern technology, let's just say the internet, we're constantly like juicing ourselves up with, we see something happen, 1,000 miles away, and we think we feel that sympathetically, that stress on our system, and then we kind of go back to it. and we seek
Yeah,
to
yeah. I mean,
maintain
listen,
it,
I
or
mean, I have a lot I can say on this, right? I mean, I just wrote a book, a very, um, well received. I got the top trauma doctors and neuroscientists in the world to talk to me. Okay,
okay.
so I've been living this for a year and a half. Gabor Mate is on the cover of my book. I mean, but the answer, it's not. It's really interesting what you just said because it's our evolutionary biology for 50,000 years, conservatively, up until 300 years ago, was natural. We were living in natural environments. We were relatively agrarian. It wasn't until the first industrial revolution of the 17th century, coal and transportation, that we started to really see the advent of what we call now cities. So this is 350 years old. Okay. So right now we live in a time where we live in an artificial box. We get into another artificial box that roves to go into another artificial box. Okay, where we work all day, and then we get back into the artificial box to go back to and we're hit with all this messaging. We're not designed anatomically to deal with this constant stimulation. In fact, nature mitigates the sympathetic nervous system. If you feel wired and like shit, and oh my God, having a horrible day, you walk into nature, you calm right down. You get present. Animals and nature make us present. So the things that would normally mitigate us are gone, and the overstimulation in the synthetic and artificial environments are how we live. So that's
Hmm.
why I think the numbers are so high. But you have to think of it, Benjamin, like if we were living in a tiger-infested jungle, that system staying on from chronic stress would keep us alive. But once it gets switched on, it's actually an injury, and you can't out yoga it, you can't out psilocybin it, you
Okay.
can't out right, you can't hyperbaric it. Once it's truly broken, and I can explain what that means anatomically, the only way to reset it is like resetting a broken leg. So people are doing all these therapeutics that are really valuable, but they're doing it over a broken leg you can't see.
Okay. And how is that an injury? Like, what does that how does that make sense? Like, it's just constantly
Well,
in
I
a
mean, we've been
state that
calling
it
it,
doesn't mean.
in World War One, they called it shell shock.
Yes.
Right? I think in the Civil War they called it the invisible wound, right? We started calling it, the 1,000-yard stare, PTSD. Um, there's, in Vietnam, I think, right? But actually, well. I mean, maybe we want to say this when we're rolling, or I can tell you, and we'll just go over it again.
Yeah.
Okay. Basically, um, you want the
We
law.
are rolling.
We are, because I
Yeah.
didn't, because normally it asks me if I'm, got it. You were recording, and I have to say, got it.
No, yeah, no, I'm recording on three different levels.
Oh,
I'm
okay. All
sorry.
right, cool. No, no, no. It's all good. It's all good. Okay, so think about it like this. Um, if, uh, if you take a dog, a goat, a rabbit, a cat, or a cow, and you beat it and terrorize it, okay, for a month, 6 months, and then you stop and you never terrorize it again, okay, that animal will be different. And it will be different in one of two ways. It will be timid, or it will be highly aggressive. We didn't just give that cow or that cat or that rabbit a biological we didn't just give it a mental disorder. Okay, we changed its biology. There was a book written that came out in 1970 called Violence and the Struggle for Existence. And it was 2 years after, written by a guy named Dr. Frank Ochberg, who does the forward to my book, who also defined Stockholm Syndrome for the FBI in the 1970s. And he wrote this book with a bunch of Stanford scientists in the 1970s. Coretta Scott King did the intro to that book because it was 2 years after Martin Luther King had been assassinated. And there's a chapter in there called Biology and Aggression, where they give the example that I just gave you. And it wasn't until 35, 40 years later that doctor who wrote that book came across my co-author, Dr. Lipov, who'd figured out what the mechanism is. So what we call it an injury because you've actually created a biological change in your body, which is now affecting your brain, that you can remediate. Okay, so it's a broken leg you can't see, but the doc likes to say it's a broken leg you can't see unless you have the wrong scanner. So how it works is, if you have overwhelming trauma or you carry chronic stress. You can get this from distant parents. You can get this from your dad not hugging you, or your mother needling you, or bullying. Or what's really, really tragic, and this is how I think it relates to, some gender dysphoria, because I'm an ally of people that are really suffering from that. But it's been, it's a mass. The numbers don't make any sense, right? So I do believe that it's highly connected to what we're seeing in terms of gender dysphoria, in terms of preteen girls, right? Because the comparison culture for a young girl is staggeringly stressful. And we weren't telling young girls in the past that, they were kind of coveted by their family. Now you can't be a young girl and not be told in every aspect of media that you're not safe. That's
or you're
stressful.
not enough.
Or you're not enough. Yeah, you're not enough. Or you're not straight. That's a massive amount of stress. So what happens is when you carry chronic allostatic load, like I did from poverty and childhood abandonment, or you have this blunt force, I'll give the example of a blunt force trauma. Okay, your brain, your amygdala, sends a signal to this gangle of nerves in your neck. That's what jerks you into either save your life or to fight and kill the tiger. Peter Levine's work, Running from the Tiger. If that's too overwhelming, or you carry the threat of tigers for too long, that's really good if you live in a chronic a tiger-infested jungle, because then you're hyper vigilant and you're careful for the tigers. Or because a tiger almost killed you, you're going to be careful for tigers for the rest of your life, right? Yeah. So it's good that it helps us to survive, to change our anatomy 2,000 years ago, okay? But what's actually happening in the body is when you send that signal, if the trauma is too overwhelming or you carry chronic stress for too long, you have nerves here that is the fight or flight system. When the trauma is too overwhelming or you carry the chronic stress, you get two changes. You get a change in the brain. You get an increase of norepinephrine and NGF, what's called nerve growth factor. So now where there was 4 nerves here, there's now 8 or 12. So what that means anatomically is this signal, these nerves in your neck, your sympathetic nervous system, is reversing. The signal's reversing, telling your brain 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, that your life is in danger, that you're under threat. I mean, imagine this. You grow up in poverty like me, and you have this biological injury. So the most innocuous, banal circumstance feels like life or death. And I can get into exactly what those symptoms are.
Yeah, let's do like a anecdote, just a personal anecdote about why for you was poverty so stress-inducing.
Oh, I mean, for me, I didn't even know if it was going to work on me. I came to this treatment as a patient and befriended the doctor. And then because I'm an artist and a successful author, I ended up thinking that this was so important to write a book on it, because it was out there. It was just at the extremes. It was at 9/11 first responders, the military, or special forces. I mean, it was when I got invited for my art and communications work to speak at Fort Bragg to special forces and psychological operations. And that's when my interest got piqued in the subject. I was never interested in trauma. I was never interested in post-traumatic stress. I was in denial about my entire life. But I was born in and raised in and out of institutional environments. With very little human touch, in abject poverty near downtown, in and around downtown Los Angeles, in Mexican neighborhoods. Okay. I was at Fort Bragg speaking for my Malcolm Gladwell type work that I do, which has to do with art and business. And this guy, Jeff Dardia, who runs the Health Initiative Task Force at Fort Bragg, showed me this thing called operator syndrome on his phone. It was identical to what I now know is an overactive sympathetic nervous system, and I can go through those symptoms with you. When I first saw that on his phone at Fort Bragg, I didn't see Benjamin. I wasn't interested in the military. When I first got invited to speak, I was not wanting to do it. I know what violence looks like. I know I wasn't really interested in assisting the U.S. military or, being involved in somebody that was going to help with American foreign policy. Mm-hmm. I developed a relationship with 2 special forces colonels, and I have a different point of view on that now. Okay. At least in relation to the special forces. So I went and did it. But when I was looking at that operator syndrome, which is a military condition that you get if you're never in a firefight, you're just in Afghanistan for a year away from your family with the threat of death. When I first saw those 8 or 9 symptoms, and I can walk you through them, I didn't see the military. I saw the Mexican neighborhoods where I grew up, and my mind started reeling. And so I go, I wonder if I went into a prison with and interviewed murderers that grew up in poverty and had this injury, and they were suffering from a crime. They committed an impulse crime when they were 20. If they would have the exact same quote mental symptoms, which are really biological, as a biological injury, as a person coming back from Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And a year and a half ago, I did that. I went in with a film crew and interviewed murderers to see if they were having the same symptoms. So,
why is it called operator syndrome?
Operator syndrome, because they call special operations forces. Okay. So when you work as special forces in the military, you're called an operator. Okay, that's why they call it operator syndrome. So here's an anecdote. Say I have. So can I go through the symptoms and give you a really?
Yeah, please. And just for sake of discussion, what's the turnover rate for these operators, these special forces? Is it like 4 years, 10 years? I guess it varies.
I mean, most of these guys don't ever get deployed more than 36 months at the outset. It starts to wear on you. I'm nervous. When I first just started talking to the military about this, because these colonels that invited me to Fort Bragg, they run all the training for all of Special Forces. And one of them said to me, they knew nothing about this, even though they were already doing 10 a day at Womack. But they were doing it off of an old paper, so they weren't getting the result that we see now. And when I was first telling these colonels who are now close friends about it, they say, oh, don't, the military is going to abuse that. And I said, what are you talking about? They said, they're going to use it to turn people around in the field. And I said, come on. And then a year later, I was at Fort Bragg, and I found out that Delta Force was already doing that.
What do you mean? Right? So if somebody starts getting off their game, then they go through this treatment to get back on the game?
I mean, Olympic athletes will do this treatment. Say somebody like Lindsey Vonn, I'm not calling her out specifically, gets into a skiing accident at 65 miles an hour, okay? Her reaction time and her ability to ski is going to change. She goes, resets her sympathetic over... and then her reaction times go back to normal. The military studied this the most and proven that the Navy did a study, I think, that proven that when people went out and reset this nervous system, that the reaction times went back to normal or close to it.
But not better. If you don't have trauma, you take this, you're not going to it's not enhancing performance. It's resetting performance.
It's resetting performance. It's resetting performance. But if you made it into Delta Force, or you're an Olympian, you're a high performer. In fact, that's one of the reasons that I was willing. I got it. I was in denial about being even traumatized till about 6 years ago. I reached a certain level of success, and I wasn't as happy as what I was. I thought if poverty and ignorance meant pain, then affluence and education would mean contentment or pleasure. So I pursued those things and got further than I thought I maybe could have. I mean, I tried. And as I got more successful, those feelings were going away. And that freaked me out. Okay. So I knew a military psychologist through my literary agent, and he started telling me about this. And then I had a forensic neuroscientist that I knew, who's a clinician and a researcher, vet it for me. Okay. And so to me, the idea that it was a biological injury, because when you grow up with abandonment, like I was, you don't go to doctors. So the idea that I would fly to Chicago and do this treatment that's not, known outside of, it's been on Rogan, it's been on 60 Minutes, it's been on CBS This Morning, it was on the doctor show all the time. Why wouldn't artists write a book with a well-known researcher and prominent scientist? Because I didn't see the extreme. I saw the living room. I saw tons of people in America that don't think they had trauma, don't think their kids have had trauma, don't think their spouses had trauma, yet they have these symptoms, which I can give you. Yeah. They're confused. And so I wanted that truth out there. In 2012, Frank Ochberg, a famous psychiatrist who defined Stockholm syndrome for the FBI, he in the 70s, he started he started pushing it, the name change from post-traumatic stress disorder to post-traumatic stress injury, which is what it is.
Okay.
So
So
yeah.
just to ground it, couch it in your story. So if somebody grows up in your in the conditions that you do, there's kind of like, I guess there's maybe more than two paths to take, but one is to, try to succeed at life. And
Mm-hmm.
the other is to kind of succumb to criminality, or just succumb to, like, I live in a shitty world, I'm going to be a shitty person, or
Sure.
I got a shitty lot, I'm going to try to improve my lot. So you went the I'm going to try to improve my lot route. But every time you achieved some sort of success, or step out of your trauma, your baseline would just like follow you. Like you would be chased by these
So it's,
symptoms.
no one's ever put it that way, but it's an incredibly astute and spot on way of uh, saying it. And then 7 years ago, I was signed to the agency group. I mean, I eventually moved agents, which was bought by UTA. So I was at one of the top talent agencies in the world, being represented by the head of literary, who also represented my heroes, the RZA, Bill Nye the Science Guy. I was in
Uh-huh.
the same stable as Eminem and 50 Cent for literary, right?
Yeah.
And and then things just have progressed from there. I have had a very unusual life. I could read at a high level at a young age, but as far as education was concerned, I was semi-literate until I was 19. And I got an opportunity to change my life by a relative that offered me a very unique proposition to focus on studies without a monkey on my back. And it just turned out, without poverty sitting on my back. I mean, I started off doing remedial classes at a community college uh, at 19 years old. I probably had a first grade writing level and math level. And 5.5 years later, I graduated. Less than 5.5 years later, I graduated from the London School of Economics. So I've had a very interesting trajectory of living in both extremes, Benjamin. I've lived in the worst kind of poverty you can imagine: 5 people, no air conditioning; 8 people in a 100 square foot apartment with no air conditioning and a hot plate, and dust and decay everywhere in Los Angeles drought weather. Right. I mean, real roach infested environments where when I slept on a floor as a kid and would sleep with a shirt over my face so that roaches wouldn't crawl in my mouth. We're talking, I don't want to gross everyone out, but like, I've seen a lot of reality. And then very quickly, I was around the wealthiest, most privileged people in the world.
Yeah.
And that has been I think it's given me a unique perspective on how I see pretty much everything.
But it's just kind of it's an American, or it's just a classic story, like rags to riches, right? But there's
Yeah, I
something,
mean,
even in those contexts, there's something that is wounded or injured about you. So you
well,
could,
yeah,
just to give the lie to, just pull yourself out of poverty, pull yourself out, but you're just like working hard enough is going to save
that's
you,
a
or
that's
whatever.
a that's a lie.
Yeah.
You can't. There's no such thing as a self-made person, in my opinion. I've never seen one. Okay, I had angels at various stages. I had various physical conditions because I was not being observed that almost killed me several times as a child. Where in that last lick of time, I was rushed to the hospital
Okay.
by a relative that came by. Right. So it is a um, once you have this injury, like, the symptoms are what you'd experience if you were running from a tiger, if a tiger was chasing you. Okay. And we're designed to live in that state for about 90 seconds, where we either kill the tiger, fight, or flee from the tiger. We're not. So when we live there all the time, it discombobulates our immune system. It destroys the scavenger system on our immune system. It leads to
Hmm.
cancer. It leads to autoimmune disease.
Yeah.
Nadine Burke Harris has done, a physician in Oakland, has done incredible work where she's proven that our ACEs score, adverse childhood experiences, is the leading cause of disease in adults. Well, what's the mechanism that's doing it?
Yes.
It's the nervous system being discombobulated that's causing all the trouble.
Okay.
If you've read Body Keeps the Score, great. The body keeps the score. That's true. Now what?
Yeah.
If the body keeps the score, the sympathetic nervous system is the scorekeeper. That's what's causing the damage, and
Okay.
it can now be reset. So as far as like growing up in that environment, you either succumb, like, yeah, they talk about what becomes a dark, cynical personality, which is really a biological injury, I know now. But I've read academic papers on what's called a dark cynicism, that when poverty or that kind of mindset overtakes you. But that's really a biological injury. It's not it's truly a cynicism. Okay. And you, so for me, I was not thinking, I'm going to get out of here and I'm going to fight and I'm going to make it. I was thinking, I'm fucking desperate and I'm going to try. Okay. And it was a struggle, but I kept my nose clean. I didn't, I was playing chess in the environment to a degree that I was not going down the path that my brother went down a little bit. I was like, I saw him get involved with law enforcement. I saw him get involved with drugs. And I was like, I'm not going to doing any of that. I'm not going to take anything. I'm not going to. And so, but it was more, it was never, eventually it became a plan. But I was never thinking that I'm going to overcome this and go to one of the top, most prestigious schools in the world. Never. I was more just, I have to get the fuck away from here. And it turned, but 100%, what you're making me think of a little bit is Horatio Alger more than Charles Dickens. Horatio Alger, he wrote all these books, I think, in the 30s. He was one of the most prolific writers in the 30s. And he was different than Dickens with, which is that great story that you're talking about, that great American story, which is Rags to Riches. Horatio Alger wrote all these books, and it was more like rags to respectability, right? The guy got out of poverty, and maybe he didn't get rich, but he did well, and he got the girl, right? So, and those stories in the 30s, I think it was post-Depression, where he was probably the biggest writer in the world with those stories post-Depression. I could have my timeline wrong, but I think so. And so, so that's what I think.
But you get out of poverty, but that poverty sticks with you. The poverty mindset, maybe.
Oh yeah, man.
And so what are some of those symptoms that when you came across this in like the battle scarred, operators, so you're like, wait, hold on, this is me. How did you see that reflected?
Well, I saw really what I saw Mexicans. I grew up in Mexican neighborhoods and I hated it. But I always had a deep affinity for Mexican people because of the family values, the work ethic. One thing I learned when I was a really young boy, and then I'll answer your question, is I would watch these guys. And there, we have this park in LA that is a working class park. Everybody uses it, but more working class people use it, called Griffith Park. And if you stumble across a Mexican birthday party and you're 5 years old, 7 years old, and they have a piñata, they'll let any kid join. And that's magic, right? So, I hated the poverty at the time. When I got older, I realized that it was a great privilege to live in a cultural mix like that, to just be bombarded with so much diversity, even though I was unaware of it at the time. But this is me. Okay, so you'd have to look at it like the symptoms you'd experience if you were running from a tiger. Okay, if a tiger jumped out of nowhere. You'd have anxiety about the tiger. Is the tiger going to eat me? You'd have a hair trigger, you'd be reactive. Where's the tiger? Where's the tiger? You'd be hyper vigilant about the tiger. You'd be hyper aroused about the tiger. You'd be paranoid, more mildly paranoid. Where's the tiger? Where's the tiger? You would have a constant sense of doom. Okay? The tiger's going to get me any second. These 25% of these guys that come back from Afghanistan have ED. You can't have sex if you're running from a tiger. You can't sleep if a tiger's right there. Okay? And in the military community, where people are trained to protect, the ultimate form of flight is suicide. And in the neighborhoods where I grew up, where violence is a little cheap and violent behavior is a little more acceptable, the ultimate form of fight is homicide. So think about this, Benjamin. You have a kid that grows up in poverty like me, and he's a working class kid with good parents, and he has a busted taillight because he's poor. But he grew up with the stress of poverty. So the most banal situation becomes life or death to him. And then a first responder, a police officer, who everybody shits on, but is like, when you grow up in poor neighborhoods, there's a love-hate relationship with the police. Okay? Black people are culturally conservative. Nobody calls the police more than Black people or poor people when they need them. But so it's a complicated relationship. Okay? But you say you have this police officer, and that police officer is dealing with constant threats to the life every day, very incredible chronic allostatic load situations. 100% of the time, if you're a police officer in the field, you're going to have this injury. So you got two people with a biological injury where this signal in their neck is telling their brains that the most innocuous, banal situation, like a donut or a cheeseburger or a traffic stop, is life or death. So we have these concepts where we're kind of trying to attack, systemic racism, and we need to. Does that exist? Sure, right? But you have this scenario. You got two people with this biological injury, and they have an interaction over a traffic stop. One person goes to the morgue, and both of their lives are forever changed. And we're looking at all these other things when really at the heart of what's going on is this prescient biological injury to their body.
Yeah. So when did you first come across proof that this remedy was a remedy? Like what stopped you in your tracks? It sounds like you were seeing something reflected back onto you about it, and the stories of the people that you met.
This is a lot more vulnerable of an interview than I was expecting, Benjamin. I thought we were going to be talking about everyone else.
Corey didn't tell you my style.
But no, I'll be honest. 6 years ago, I got into a level of success and I was uncomfortable, and I was like, this is ridiculous. I would have these major things where some of the biggest companies in the world would invite me in to teach their brand people, and just crazy shit that should just never happen my life is impossible. I mean, my agent called me last night, Benjamin, and she was screaming on the phone. I was like, what is going on? And she said, I just got off a plane. I was like, well, that's exciting. And she said, no, you don't understand. American Airlines offers 12 books, some of the greatest writers in the world, as free audio books on the flight. And your first book, The Iconist, is one of those books. And I listened to half of it on the flight. Like, that's crazy stuff. That book was published in Chinese and Korean, right? My life is hard because I deal with a lot of forces, but I'm also an incredibly gratitude-driven person no matter what happens. Mm-hmm. But 5 or 6 years ago, just so much good was happening. And I was just like, something really, really, really good would happen, like unbelievable rock star shit, right? And I would just be fucking miserable. I've never really kind of expressed this publicly before. I mean, fucking miserable. Like the kind of thing, like you get a record deal and like, yeah, high fives. And I'd be sitting alone in my room thinking about all the things that could go wrong. Right? Okay. Okay. Like that was the sense of doom was like crazy.
Okay.
So
every opportunity was a threat or a masked threat potentially.
Yeah. So I went to therapist for the first time. Okay. And we're 6 weeks in, and this woman, this, incredibly brilliant, gender neutral person, didn't tell me what their pronouns were, but an amazing human, an amazing individual, said, okay, we have to do a diagnosis. And I was like, oh, well, what are you talking about? And I've been swearing. Is it okay if I swear here and there?
Yeah.
Okay. I said, what are you talking about? And she said, well, there's a diagnosis, and that's part of my job. You're right. And I said, well, I didn't come for a diagnosis. I said, well, I got to give it to you. And I'll call her she never corrected me, said, you have post-traumatic stress disorder, acute complex post-traumatic stress. Okay. To which my response, Benjamin, was to laugh in her face. Okay. This woman's eyes got wet. I talk about it in the book, which is full of incredible narrative. It reads like a novel, and it has a lot of science in it. Her eyes got wet, and she looks at me and she said, have you been listening, Jamie, to the stories you've been telling me? And I said, yeah. And she said, how can you not have post-traumatic stress? And it was like the whole lie, my whole bullshit lie came tumbling down. And over the next 3 weeks, I was hugging the cactus. I was just looking at the truth of myself and realizing that my whole life narrative of being this superhuman Nietzschean-like character that could rise from the ashes was total bullshit. I was fucked up. I was scarred. I had been victimized. When you grow up like me, and you have to survive, the last thing you can be in a place like that, for multiple reasons, is a victim. So I was like, I've been victimized. I'm damaged. I am like, so the whole life narrative fell apart.
Okay.
And so when that happened, I started going, now what do I do? I shared a literary agent with a very well-known uh, military doctor, and she was had quit her job after TAPS after 15 years and was working with this dual sympathetic reset of the nervous system. And I thought, God, I wonder if that would work for me. If it's biological, then maybe I don't have to be afflicted for the
Okay.
rest of my life.
Yeah.
That was almost 3 years ago.
Okay. So was there something unappealing about other alternative forms of dealing with this PTSD or AC PTSD?
It was really providential. I mean, I knew this military doctor through my agent. And then after the book, The Iconist, came out, probably the most bona fide and accredited forensic psychiatrist in the United States, if not the world. His name is Dr. John J. Faber. He read that book and he sent me a message on my website. And he said, I'm a huge fan. I'd like my foundation to fly you to Los Angeles to speak to inner city kids about your life. And I wrestled with that. I thought, well, I'll come to LA and I'll talk to inner city kids, but I don't think I could take money for that. I had a speaking agent at the time.
Okay.
And I just thought I'll do it for free, but I'm not charging for going to my hometown to speak to kids that look like me. I'm not going to do that. And anyway, so I was just so happy that a scientist like my whole kind of Malcolm Gladwell-ish, Dan Pink, Adam Grant, my perspective on the world is very TED Talk. And so, I didn't know how scientists, serious scientific people or academics would take my work. So when I heard from the scientist,
they're looking for data, not anecdote, right?
Yeah, exactly. So here's a guy that was his last job before running the Amen Clinic in Los Angeles was as the director of behavioral health for all of Humana, and he's the most accredited for. And he had written a book that right before this when he had sent me his book called Escape. Rehabilitate your brain and stay out of the legal system. And so he is the one that first got me thinking of this as a biological injury. And so, but he didn't know anything about the nervous system. So when I came across this treatment, I was friends with this guy. I consider him to be an extremely close friend and one of the most important people that I've ever met in my life. This guy, Dr. John J. Faber, he's definitely one of the most compassionate human beings I've ever met. He's a special, special human. And I said, have you heard of this? He said, never. I said, could you vet it for me? He said, sure. And then he sent me like papers and a complete evaluation way to evaluate whether I should do it. It was kind of like, well, what's the upside? What's the downside? And how invasive is it?
Yeah.
And so it was all upside, no long-term side effects outside of the first day, like you're tired for a day and you're not dependent on drugs and you don't need to regulate your sympathetic nervous system every day with outside forces.
I've heard that you cry for a week or 8 hours, is it?
See, it's really random how we wake up. You see these guys, like he'll do it on somebody that was in Vietnam, and you'll see a 75-year-old man wake up weeping. I actually don't like to show that footage because it almost looks like they're on drugs and they have no drugs in them. They just have a local anesthetic in their sympathetic. Okay. There's a lot of people that wake up crying. In fact, when I decided that I was going to start getting interested in studying it in relation to the mass society, I was taking a friend of mine who was the son of a grandson of a billionaire and who had indulged his son, and his father died young. And he'd been a drug addict most of his childhood. So he was an absentee father, and then he died young. And this guy who didn't associate with trauma, who was the son of a billionaire, had all the symptoms. And I'd convinced him to go and meet me in Chicago to get this treatment. And he didn't think it was going to work, and it didn't work. Right side is typically adult trauma. Left side is typically childhood trauma. You can only do one side per day. A dual injection to the C7 and C3 vertebra using an ultrasound, using bupivacaine, which is the same $2 amount of anesthesia that goes into an epidural. And it's a local anesthetic. It just turns off the sympathetic system. Okay. Turns on 10 minutes later at baseline. And I can explain to you what happened.
You're causing this one part of your body to fall asleep or to go into stasis and then to wake back up. It's just a reset. There's no other drugs involved other than just stopping feeling for what, half an hour?
That drug wears off within 7 to 8 hours.
Okay.
Okay. And then it's called bupivacaine the same way it would affect a person if you were to do it up. It's a different part of the body, bupivacaine. Okay. Right. So so I don't want to make it about pharma, but pharmaceutical companies. One of the reasons I decided to write this book is a private equity firm in Chicago teamed up with a doctor 3.5, 4 years ago and decided to open clinics with all the modern protocols all over the world. There's now 35 clinics in the United States, one in Australia and Israel, and counting. Okay. So I would have never written a book on this if a private equity firm, they're not doing it. Maybe that guy wants to do good, but he saw an opportunity to change the world and make a lot of money. And so if that guy didn't exist, I probably would not have felt comfortable writing this book, The Invisible Machine. Okay. And the most important part of this book to me, Benjamin, is even if you didn't, there's no way anyone could read this book. I don't care who you are and not understand that your any sort of trauma that you've had is biological. Even if you never get the treatment, that changes your life, just that understanding. There's no book ever been written where you cannot walk away from this book and not know that trauma is biological. That changes everything, even if you never do the treatment, because it changes the way you see yourself and it changes the way you see people around you. I don't see anyone anymore, an addict, a criminal. I mean, listen, there's evil people out there, but I don't see anybody like an addict or somebody on the street ever without just seeing a person that's overwhelmed by their nervous system. And all they're trying to do, like Gabor Mate says, is regulate their nervous system. Mm-hmm. And they're just finding an illicit way to do it rather than a licit way to do it.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
But you say trauma is biological as opposed to what? I mean, a mental health problem? Just compare and contrast that, because there's a huge campaign to change the name right now from PTSI or from PTSD disorder to post-traumatic stress injury. So a disorder is like something that's your wiring is wrong.
Yeah, well, no, I think when we think of a disorder, we think of this like amorphous mental problem.
Okay.
And it's incredibly like mental illness. It's incredibly stigmatizing. Okay. And you see yourself like, you go to Afghanistan, you sacrifice your life, your body, your wife, your family, your kids get secondary PTSD, post-traumatic stress, your wife gets secondary post-traumatic stress, your body gets broken if you're special forces. And then you come back and they're like, hey, you're crazy. That's dark and it's wrong.
Okay.
It's unjust, because all that's happening is that person has a biological injury and it can now be remediated. So just understanding that it's a biological injury changes the world. You look at your child different. Like now when I used to see hustlers on the street, Benjamin, like if I'm walking around in Portland or New York or LA and I see somebody marking me, I would get rageful because I grew up in an environment where it was offensive to me that person thinks that they're looking at me like, can I get something from that guy? Now, when I see somebody marking me like that, I just have compassion. It's completely changed the way I see the world. I just know I only see biology because that's what's going on. So just even if you didn't get the treatment, there's the thing I know we've achieved in this book. This is the best book ever written on getting one to understand that their trauma is 100% biological and understanding the science behind that. That alone, if you did nothing, will change you and the way you move through the world for the rest of your life. And that's what this book, I think, and again, that's not totally a result of me, the doctor's invention. I worked with this collaborative writer named Holly Lawrence, who'd written a very successful book on post-traumatic stress and an incredibly successful book that was turned into a movie called on false incarceration.
Okay.
Holly Lawrence. The book was called, what's that? I can't think of the name of the book right now.
The Everything Girl?
No. It's got like, it sounds like something that would be a movie about...
How to Survive a Day in Prison or Arsenal of Hope?
The Arsenal of Hope is the post-traumatic stress book. But there's another book that's the...
So, and just to formulate a question, And thank you for letting us go down all these different
Sure.
threads
Yeah.
at the
I've
same
never done an interview anything like this. It's very,
amorphous. Is it like mental
no,
illness?
it's amazing. No, it's special.
Well, what would be
Crown Heights is
another
the name of the film and the
Crown
name of the
Heights?
book.
Okay.
Yeah. Crown Heights. Yeah.
Is so your proposition, the proposition that Dr. Eugene Lipov has formulated, that this comes down to the sympathetic nervous system. Could there be other things going on?
100%. There's other things
Okay.
going on. There's the
Yeah.
vagal nerve. There's a thing called polyvagal theory. The guy that wrote polyvagal theory, Stephen Porges, who's the psychiatric chair at the Kinsey Institute in Indianapolis, he's very famous. He endorses Lipov's work and Lipov and this book heavily. Okay. All the top trauma doctors and neuroscientists that I reached out to in the world all agreed to talk to me and all contributed.
Okay. To this book and to
Yeah,
I
so
guess
there's the vagal nerve.
the case.
There's
Okay.
there's one of the things that I saw consistently. I really just set out to study the sympathetic nervous system, and and write a book that would read like a novel, that would be a science book. I have one of the top science and health publishers in the world, so I wanted to write like a book that would be important, that would read like a novel. It's like Who Killed the Electric Car with consequences. You know, a person going to jail, our laws are based on intent, is suffering from the same physiological injury as somebody coming back from war, and nobody knows it or is talking about it. That's
Okay.
staggering.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
So to me, it was a psychological thriller. Right. And that's how it reads, with a ton of science. But what's going on physiologically in the body is when you get that overwhelming trauma, or you carry the chronic stress that can come from cyberbullying, or not getting hugged as a child, or being needled by your mom, or your dad being away all the time. Children take on stress in crazy ways. They think everything is about them and everything is their fault.
Yeah. Yeah. And that conditions
What happens
them.
is,
Okay.
when this gets heightened, if it stays heightened too long or gets overly heightened, two things are basically secreted in the brain. Norepinephrine, which is connected to mood swings and anxiety. So you can see that on a brain scan. Anybody with post-traumatic stress has excessive amount of norepinephrine in the brain. But the more important factor is you get an increase in what's called NGF, nerve growth factor. So where there's maybe these nerves here which connect to the brain here, where maybe there was 4 nerves, now there's 8 nerves.
And so this is documented.
Nerves.
Like this is objectively,
this
empirically
is how we
verified.
think it works right now.
Okay.
This is the supposition of how it works. The military studied this exhaustively. Obama endorsed this, as I said, back in 2008. Yeah. It's been in 60 Minutes, Joe Rogan, the New York, every Wired magazine, CBS This Morning, the Doctor Show. This is not nobody's questioning this. And right now, there's a $5 million NYU study that's being done with functional MRI that makes it. And this injection's been around since 1926. It's just been reconfigured, so we know it's safe. It was developed for tingling hands in 1926, and the doctor reconfigured it. This is FDA approved for pain. Post-traumatic stress is pain.
Okay.
Okay. So this is not out there. This is not out there. It's just the reason people don't identify with it is because they only see it when they see it on Rogan. It's Dakota Meyer, a Navy SEAL, or when they see it on the Doctor Show, it's a 9/11 first responder.
Yeah.
I think 40 to 50% of the U.S. Yeah, I think 40 to 50% because of the modern world of the U.S. and global population have this physiological injury, and nobody's talking about it.
Mm-hmm. So just back to the science, this neoephrine stuff.
Okay, so let me explain.
And then also the nerve growth thing. So how does that reverse?
So the nerve growth factor does this thing that we call sprouting. It leads to extra nerve growth in the brain. In the stellate ganglion connected to the brain. What that looks like in kind of layman's terms is this: that signal that kind of jerks you into fight or flight, that keeps you alive. And again, before we end, we should talk about how it relates to cancer and autoimmune disease and other diseses, ADHD and gender dysphoria. But when you get overwhelmed or you carry the stress too long, and it's too much, typically we'll come back to baseline. But if it's too much or it goes on too long, you stay stuck up. What's going on anatomically in the body is you've sprouted extra nerves in your stellate ganglion. So basically, in a layman's terms, what's happening is the signal's reversing. Rather than something that is supposed to last 30 or 90 seconds, where you're either supposed to die or kill the tiger or flee from the tiger, it gets stuck up, and the signal reverses with this gangle of nerves in your neck telling your brain 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, 7 days a week, that your life is in danger,
Yeah.
that you're under threat of life. That's why if two people that live in the inner city, they have this injury, they get into an argument over a cheeseburger, somebody's going to the morgue and somebody's going to prison for the rest of their life. And their intent has nothing to do with it. This biological imperative, okay, is 100% believably telling them that this innocuous incident can kill them.
So, okay. I spoke with Corey, our mutual friend, about this, and he told he told stories because he worked on the film with you guys. He told stories of what happens when people go through this treatment. It seems like, I mean, I can't. I'm not authorized to talk about anybody else. Yeah. So, but there's this really interesting thing that I've noticed in the stories that he's told me, that after this reset happens, this flood of emotion, it's like something has been repressed or something has not been able to be processed. And then all of a sudden the floodgates open and he, it
so you're watching E.T., okay, while a tiger's chasing you. Okay. Are you going to be able to experience the emotion of E.T.?
Okay.
So you're watching an ET while you're falling in love with your wife or being around your children. Are you going to be able to experience the emotion of your children, that connection, or that of your wife or your loved one, if a tiger's chasing you? No, you're going to turn off your emotions to focus on the survival of the tiger.
So all those emotions are being stored up in you.
Oh,
right?
yeah. So
all of this life experience, post-traumatic stress is building up in you.
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you about the tent pole in the book, the tent pole of our film, Trevor Beeman. He was a guy that looks like a Calvin Klein model super soldier. He was molested by his father from 8 to 16. The guy went to jail. He was beaten into Latin Kings at 11, even though he's white. He shot at medical heroin in Afghanistan. This guy was suicidal for 20 years, homicidal towards his father for 30 years. But it was only he was special forces, so they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars fixing them. When you're special forces, they do not want crazy elite soldiers out there. So there's an endless paycheck.
Thank you, the U.S. military.
Exactly. And Green Beret Foundation and other incredible organizations. So there was an endless paycheck for him. He'd done everything. And he was barely staying alive because he has a beautiful wife and these young kids. And I met him. Convinced him to do it. It'll be 2 years ago, July. He went and did this. He just did a TED talk for TED Portland, which is the largest TED in the world. And just went back to being a normal person. And one of the things that Trevor says is that all of the work that he'd done for 20 years kicked in.
All that psychological work, all that
psychological work, it all kicked in. You're basically, if you're doing this over, if you're doing EMDR, RTM, talk therapy, all these incredible modalities that we need over active sympathetic nervous system, it's like doing physical therapy over a broken leg. You need to reset the leg first. The other part of this puzzle is what we call traumatic brain injury or brain toxicity, right? That is another major contributing factor. Okay, so if you've had blunt force trauma to the brain head, or if you look on a brain scan and you look at blunt force trauma to the brain, in terms of blood flow to the frontal cortex, various things around the brain that can agitate it. And you were to look at brain toxicity, which is caused by drugs and alcohol. 90% of the people in our prison system self-identify as having drug and alcohol problems. A guy coming back from Afghanistan and their blood flow to their frontal cortex, which is a physical injury, the decreased blood flow looks fairly similar to somebody that has a drug and alcohol problem in terms of decreased blood flow to their frontal cortex.
Okay.
So that's where this gets scary. If you have decreased blood flow to your frontal cortex, which is also, I call it almost a teeter-totter. Those are the primary two physical injuries that cause the extreme behaviors and the extreme agitations. So if you have a situation where you've got decreased blood flow to the frontal cortex, which is your executive function, okay, and then you have an overactive sympathetic where everything is a fight or a flight, that's where you get that combination of decreased executive function and everything's a fight. That's where you get an O.J. Simpson or a Aaron Hernandez.
Yeah. Everything's a problem and you can't solve it.
And then there's no brain power mitigating against it.
Yeah.
Right. That's why you see so many people in our prison system, in my prison, and in my estimation, and I don't, I think that in the next 5 to 10 years, all of this stuff, all of this science is going to come out. The NYU studies happening right now. But there's also, the military has studied this exhaustively. There's a ton of studies that show that this is, this is mainstream. There's 35 clinics in the US. You can go down the street almost wherever you live and grab this. I'm just trying to say, if you're a yoga instructor or a plumber or a CEO or a teacher, and you don't understand why your kids who haven't had trauma have those 8 symptoms that I named: anxiety, reactivity, hypervigilance, hyperarousal, mild paranoia, sense of doom, lack of sleep, suicidal ideation, violent behavior. They didn't have trauma. Why are they experiencing this? They have an overactive sympathetic nervous system.
Okay. So what happened to your sense of doom going through this therapy yourself?
Oh my gosh, Benjamin, no one's ever asked me that question, and it is the most transformative thing I've ever done in my life. I almost want to cry talking about it, because I live an incredibly stressful life. That quote, there's a quote from Jerry Maguire where he says, "We live in a cynical world with tough competitors." Okay. I'm a person that grew up, I'm an artist, so I'm, highly sensitive. I'm like an antenna of sensitivity, but I also grew up how I grew up, and it can be incredibly forceful and aggressive because I'm comfortable with it. So here I am being this highly sensitive person, and I'm in this world of capitalistic forces, which are with really powerful CEOs and corporations, and it can be punishing when art meets commerce.
Yeah.
You could say art meets chaos, right? And I work with corporations. I can't get my work out there unless I'm engaged with business. So I take that very seriously, but it can be punishing sometimes. And it was pretty much unbearable, just my work, because I work for some of the biggest companies in the world. Now, I'm at peace when things happen that would normally rock me for 2 weeks. I just kind of go, huh, it's really when something extreme happens that I notice it, or when I'm watching a movie or I'm with someone that I'm really fond of and I feel joy in a way that I've never felt, or I was like crying or laughing during a movie in a way that I didn't before.
So
but also when a really stressful situation comes in, I used to feel it in my entire body.
Okay.
And, people get inured, you do this and then 6 months go by, you forget how you used to feel. So sometimes I forget how I used to feel before, and then something really stressful will happen. And I'm just like, whoa. And that's when I go, holy shit, I cannot believe I'm cool right now.
So it sounds like, just from the very brief description, that whenever something positive would happen, there was always kind of a distance between you and it. And whenever something stressful happened, you were really inside of it. And so your landscape has changed.
Yeah, really, the landscape is completely changed. Really inside of it, it doesn't do it justice. My body would overwhelm me. I would get a tingling. If it was a really stressful situation and it was jarring news, I would get a tingling sensation of absolute terror throughout my entire body. I had bad dreams. You know what I mean? I had, if you had asked me if I had anxiety before, I would have said, no, I'm fine. That's because chronic anxiety was so built into me. I didn't even know that there was such a thing as not having that. Now that I don't have it, I kind of go, wow, I can't believe I was letting myself live that way. And that's why, as much as I care about the military and the neighborhoods of the people I grew up in, it's the smaller cohort of people. That's 2% of the population, the incarcerated in the military. I want to bring this to the other 48% of people that don't think they have trauma, that are middle-class people. That's where the numbers are. And I want them to experience relief. And so I want people to read this book so that they can understand what's going on inside their bodies. Yeah. Yeah. And then I want them to share that.
How does it not go? How do you flip the switch and it not go back to trauma response? Like how does this?
Well, it doesn't. It doesn't. If you get re-traumatized, Benjamin, you can re-injure yourself.
Okay, but how does just the act of it falling asleep and being
okay. Here's what that happens. Okay, So back to nerve growth factor. So the minute you do this injection, okay, again, right side, dual injection, using an ultrasound into this. They use a even milder anesthetic before they give you that anesthetic. It feels like a pinch, right? Um, it turns it off. You're basically with using bupivacaine, the same $2 amount of anesthesia that goes through an epidural, ironically. And what's also ironic about that is the doctor discovered this when he was doing research on women going through menopause and dealing with hot flashes. And some of them, he was reconfiguring this 100-year-old shot at that time, 80-year-old shot, and they started saying their post-traumatic stress symptoms went away. And so that's when he started. He was at that point he became a serious researcher, and he found it. But back to what's happening in the body. The minute you do that injection, depending on whether you had adult trauma, you're going to experience that war, sexual assault, first day. Second day, and I can get back to that billionaire grandson story. Second day, left side. They always do the right side first. But the minute that he injects, to the C3 and the C7 in the stellate ganglion, and he turns it off, two things happen to the brain. The norepinephrine level goes back to normal. And you can see that on the brain scan. Okay. And again, I was really lucky. It wasn't the ideal scan. We used a SPECT scan, but Daniel Amen, who is one of the most, well-known neuroscientists and psychiatrists in the world, who's more into looking at this as a biological injury than he is to drugging people. He's got 7 New York Times bestseller. He's a media star. He was in Justin Bieber's biopic. He's on the Kardashians. He's the most famous, quote, neuroscientific psychiatric clinician in the world, and he's trying to fix people by remediating the brain. He's been an incredible partner for me. So a lot of people, I would scan their brain in Amen Clinic, and then I would do this treatment on there over 2 days, and I would scan their brain again less than 24 hours later. Okay. My first but what's going on is the minute you do that injection, norepinephrine goes back to normal. Okay. And then the nerve growth factor goes back to normal. It stops being secreted in the brain. When the nerve growth factor stops being secreted, okay, that extra sprouting of nerves cannot, it can't be supported without the NGF being constant.
Okay.
So the minute that NGF goes back to normal, those extra nerves where first you had 4, then you got traumatized, and now you have 8, that's the injury, it goes back to 4.
Okay.
And that's what's actually happening anatomically.
Okay.
Okay.
And without those two stimuli or factors going on, you're operating at, let's say, a non-tiger modality. You're just picking fruit. If we go back, like you're just you're again, ready, but you're not. You're in that balanced state. You're not on tiger flight.
You're saying if I never have been injured.
No, I'm saying once those two things are remediated, the chemical.
You're in the non-tiger state. You're just a person in the world.
You become a person in the world, and then that's when you start to. This is the great story aspect of it. That's when you start to, like. Did you ever watch Lost? The last season where they start to remember who they are. You go back. You start flashing back, like all that suppressed stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Trevor talks about how he had a horror show his entire life, and it playing in the back of his mind. Yeah. So he'd be with his kids or his wife, and he's always seeing this horror show. Like he has the memories, but the horror show just turns off.
Okay. Yeah. The being in there. Yeah. And for you, you were able to see yourself, your environment, or you're plugging into your environment differently. It's not even just like the stories.
Oh my God. I mean, it's the most transformative thing I've ever done in my life. Like I'm a sought after art director, and I was overwhelmed with people wanting me to make things for them when my first book came out. I was a year into that, and I found out about this, and I dropped everything for 2 years because it's kind of like if you met Einstein before he was famous and he said, "Hey, I've got this thing I'm working on called relativity. Want to write a book with me?" Right? Yeah. I dropped and turned down work for 18 months, 2 years, because I thought I just couldn't believe that this wasn't in the mainstream. And, my publisher, who published a China study and is distributed by Penguin Random House, they're one of the top science and health publishers in the world. When they were interested in publishing this book, I thought well, that means that it'll be in every Barnes and Noble in America. It'll be everywhere.
Yeah.
I couldn't, I couldn't, I couldn't look past it. I
So
knew exactly what
you
it
had
needed to
your
be.
own personal experience, and then you go after
Yeah.
this book, and you've worked on a documentary too that accompanies this
Yeah.
book,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and so and I suppose, and from what what you've revealed about the book, like you base it on science and then anecdotes. So over and over again, you've seen other people similarly affected or maybe cured would be the
Well, back to the
correct word.
billionaire son. This was the big moment I had. I had one day that was a moment before I went to Fort Bragg. So this is January 2 years ago. I get this guy to meet me in Chicago, and he had lived in Florida. He canceled on me a couple times because of weather and his kids. And one time I was landing in Chicago, but this was the third time he shows up. He does the right side. This guy had childhood trauma. We went out to this fancy restaurant in Chicago. He's like, "This isn't going to work. I don't know why I came here. I don't even know if I want to go do the left side tomorrow." And I was like, "Well, I hope you do." So that morning, I go with him and his wife to the treatment center. He shows up to do the childhood side the next day, and I'm downstairs waiting with his wife. And um, uh, While he goes through the treatment, the doctor comes down the stairs. He and I are close friends at this point. I say, "Hey, doc, how's he doing?" The doc said, "This is a guy that never associated himself with trauma." Okay, he says, he feels great. The wife burst into tears. I'm like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! We don't even know if this worked yet. Just, whoa! Do not cry. We do not know if he's okay. We do not know if this worked." And she says, "Jamie, you don't understand. In the entire time I've known my husband, he's never said he's felt great." So now the three of us are talking downstairs, okay? And um, a woman walks into the clinic in downtown Chicago, winter, and beautiful, smiling under her mask. I braved COVID to do this, okay? She sees the doctor. She runs up to him, leans in, gives him a hug for 30 seconds, turns to my friend and I, points to him and says, "The miracle man," and runs downstairs. I go, "Come on, doc, what are you paying her?" And accounting is downstairs. So I think she works in accounting, right? She works for you. And he says, "I just met her yesterday. She's one of the worst sexual assault cases we've ever had. Yesterday, she wouldn't let me near her or alone in a room with her." So we come downstairs. The husband's walking different. He's different. We probably get 20 feet back to the hotel. He goes, "Stop. We just need to stop, 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 stop." And he turns to me and he says, "Jamie, if this was the only reason I was ever meant to know you, this is why I was meant to know you." After that, I sent 8 more of my successful white CEO friends that didn't think they ever had trauma over the next 2 years. So we go back to, he's recovering. And his wife calls me an hour later and says, "Hey, there's a health food shop down the street where they have like vegan stuff and smoothies. Do you want to go with me? Because my husband's going to be, this needs 7 hours to wear off." I was looking for something to do. So I said, "Yeah, I'll go to the vegan shop with you. It's COVID." We walk into this little vegan shop in downtown Chicago. And there's a woman there, an older woman. She's wearing a mask. She says, "Hey, how are you?" Hey, I say, "Hey, how are you? How's it going?" And very strange response. This woman said, "It's been a horrible time. My husband jumped off a building and killed himself this summer." And I was just like, "What? I just walked into a vegan shop. Like, this is too much right now." Right. But I just kind of, had this experience with my close friend. And I said, and then she says, she says, "But thank God my daughter was with him at the time, or it would have been way worse." This guy had jumped off a high rise. So now I'm confused. And I say to this woman, "I'm so sorry that happened. Why would you be happy that your daughter was with your husband right after he jumped off of a high rise?" Right. And she said, "Because she saw his face right before he ran upstairs. And she knew the person that ran up their stairs was not her father. What was it? It was this, lying to his brain."
Yeah.
I'm really, I want to bring this to the people that are listening to this or watching us, that like, "Hey, my husband doesn't really have trauma, but he has these symptoms.
Yeah.
My child doesn't have, it didn't really have trauma, but he or she has those symptoms. I want to bring it away from. I want to bring it to regular people so that, like, because there was a moment with the billionaire's kid, the billionaire's the grandson. I don't want to say who it is, but he's a very famous billionaire. And I was, they live in the South. They were West Palm Beach, and I was with. I mean, they'd moved to Hilton Head, but I was with the mother a few months later at their home in Hilton Head, and I was asking her about the treatment. She's a religious woman, and so I was kind of very interested in how she would see it through her kind of Christian lens, and she said something really kind of simple to me. She said, "No, he's very different. It's very interesting watching him with the kids. There was a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. He's just very different. You're watching him engage with the kids. So yeah, I'm 100% glad he did this."
Okay.
I said, "Well, what did you?" I said, "Okay." And what did you think when he was thinking about doing it? She said, "I just prayed that he would come up with his right answer, and he decided to do it, and I supported him." But it was interesting that she's talking about how he's engaging with the kids different because it was very passive the way she said it. And I had this profound moment in my head, Benjamin, where I thought, this thing that she's talking about in a passive way, well, post-traumatic stress is passed on. They call it secondary post-traumatic stress. It's very commonly passed on. And we could have just seen the stop of 5 generations of trauma. Because he's emotionally there for his children. And so, you can look at that in a way where it's like, oh yeah, he's there for his kids. Or you can look at it a way maybe we just stopped 5 generations of emotional trauma for a guy that didn't think he was traumatized. Mm-hmm. And so it's like I said, I think that this book is going to grow and grow and grow. We're getting ridiculous responses. It reads like a novel, I was asked on a podcast the other day, a huge show with millions of followers, and the guy hosting it said, somebody says, it sounds like you're selling this. And I said, I never sell anything. I sell ideas, and people can buy it or not. I don't give a shit. But my response to that was, I'm selling fucking relief. I do not like the idea that in the modern zeitgeist in the Western world, that people are walking around with a biological injury and we think they're crazy. It bothers me. And so even if you don't want to go do this treatment, you can't read this book and not know that it's biological. That right there is going to give you hope and relief. That right there changes the world if no one does it. It was funny. I asked Jeff Dardia one time, the guy that runs the Health Initiative Task Force at Fort Bragg, Special Forces guy. I said to him, do you think everyone that goes up in poverty has this? And he said, inner city poverty, probably. But poverty, no. I was stationed in Africa. I don't think anybody growing up in rural poverty has this. And I said, and I said, why? Well, they don't have the comparison culture. Okay. And their nervous system is being constantly mitigated by nature. They're not living in the synthetic environment with the chronic stress of the digital deluge, constant bad news, politics, COVID, constant bad news. So he said, no, I don't think anybody has this. Any children have this growing up in poverty in a rural environment.
I wonder if, as this treatment it rolls out and more studies are produced over time, if people will start to interact with their environment differently, or if the environment itself, like you were talking about, like all these artificial environments with this artificial stimulus coming in, will mean less to them or seem less real to them because the nervous system is no longer believing in it from a
I think so. I think, and I've gotten really interested in resilience techniques. What are the ways that we can bring our nervous system down? Breath work, running brings in yoga. I've met so many yoga instructors that don't think they have trauma that have this, that probably became a yoga instructor because it gives them a job where they can regulate their nervous system every day. But you have to do it every day, right?
Yeah. Okay.
What if you could just live a solar existence and do yoga because you loved it?
Yeah.
You weren't calming your nervous system every day.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. So but yeah, I'm very interested in these days in learning about, things that mitigate against the nervous system. Like our diet has a massive effect on it. Corey's girlfriend, Camille Kaifo, who's a detransitioner, she had mental health problems her whole life, and then she had this horrible transition experience, decided to go back to being a woman, and because she had, complications from surgery as part of her transition, she had to get obsessed with her physical health, her diet, every aspect of her physical health. And what she says is the minute she became obsessed with all the different things she was allergic to, inflammatory foods, really became aware of physical health and implemented that in her life, all of these mental issues that led to her false gender dysphoria went away purely from an obsession with physical health and diet. So, and if you go and you follow Doc Amen on Instagram, which is the probably the biggest health Instagram in the world. I mean, it's got 2.5 million followers. He's constantly on there talking about foods that reduce anxiety, foods that cause anxiety, right? So there's all sorts of things that we can do to keep the nervous system in check. I call it resilience tools. And there's a lot of work that's been done. There's a woman out in California. Her name is Nkem Mfumbo. If I'm getting her name wrong, I apologize. You can Google it. And she has what's called the Resilience Toolkit. And it's all these incredible things that you can do to calm yourself when you start to feel the nervous system go up so that you're not staying in that state of chronic stress. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's Gabor Mate's work. His new book, The Myth of Normal, is all about, how if he was going to invent a society that would make us crazy and make us and destroy our nervous systems, he'd invent the society we live in now. So,
fair enough.
The nervous system can be reset. It is biological. Again, there's not a lot of pushback. It's just mostly at the extreme. And then, it's now going into the mainstream with this PE firm opening up Stella centers. If you're going to get this, go to the Stella Center because it's the place where my co-authors.
And what kind of
Dr. Eugene Livoff.
How are you diagnosed that this treatment might be for you? I'm sure
it's typically symptomatic. There's a post-traumatic stress quiz you could take right on the Stella Center website.
And the danger of this, or the
that's the beauty of it, because it was originally created the reason he was studying it with women going through hot flashes is because it came out in 1925, 1926 as a treatment for tingling hands. He thought tingling hands, tingling all over the body. You have this nerve center runs from your amygdala all the way through to your toes. Yeah. But the most important part of it runs from your amygdala through your chest. And he came across a paper in 1980 where a woman was doing clipping in the stellate ganglion, which is like invasively doing surgery and clipping nerves to shut them off. Mm. And women were saying that their hot flashes went away, and so did their post-traumatic stress. So he started trying to figure out, okay, where does this need to go, and are the ways we can improve it so that you don't have to do something as invasive. Yeah. As invasive as a surgery.
It's just a reset, and the drug itself lasts 7-8 hours, and then
7-8 hours. The only side effect is you get this thing called Horner syndrome, which is what you want. Oh. Because that way you can
Horny syndrome?
No, Horners.
Oh, okay.
Horners just means you get like a slight droopy eye.
Okay. For how long?
7 hours. It's 5 hours, 7 hours. And most people that could be staring right at you and they wouldn't notice it. You'll notice it.
Yeah.
And you'll get it on the side you did it, on the right side. And if you do it the next day, you'll get it on that side. It wears right off. And because it's been around 100 years and we knew an ultrasound, it's excessively safe compared to other medical procedures. Mm-hmm. And it's inexpensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how can people get in touch with your work and find the book? And is the documentary out? Yeah.
No, the documentary is not out. We're still shooting. I mean, it's about 90%
really
done.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah. Well, that I want to be, Corey Drayton co-wrote that with me.
Yeah.
And again, Corey says that he believes he got cancer because his nervous system was overregulated.
Oh, you were going to talk about that before.
Yeah, what happens is when you have an overactive nervous system, it discombobulates the scavenger system in the body, which kills disease and cancer.
Okay.
So, I think we're going to find that this system especially if you compare it to Nadine Burke Harris's work with which she was able to prove that the leading cause of disease in adults is adverse childhood experiences. What's causing that? It's a dysregulated. With the science, the more we research, we're going to see that it's an overactive sympathetic nervous system,
Okay.
which can now be remediated. So you're not just feeling better; you may be preventing a disease that you're going to have in 10 years or 20 years, right? And that's one of the things we're studying right now is that disease is related to aging. And so if you can um, uh, remediate the sympathetic nervous system, you basically slow down the aging process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. But where you can go to dreugenelipov.com. It's an incredible resource. Again, if you do decide to get this, go to the doctor. The modern protocols exist at Stella Center. Go to the Stella Center because there's the modern protocols are the difference between sometimes a 70%. Now it's up to 85 to 90% effective.
Okay.
So you want to go to a Stella Center and get where the doctor is the chief medical officer. I'm not their ambassador. They don't pay me.
Yeah.
I just want people to get the relief.
And they're all across the United States at this point.
35 across the United States. You're not getting this if you're not getting what's called DSR SGB. It was originally called stellate ganglion block. Block just means a block of anesthetic put in place.
Yeah.
Blocked into place. But right now, you have to get what's called DSR SGB, dual sympathetic reset. We're in every Barnes and Noble in America, and where all books are sold. Amazon. There's an audio book. But yeah, Stella Center, you can take a quiz if these symptoms resonated with you.
Yeah.
And it really, and then all these other incredible therapeutics that we have out there are so much more effective. I mean, I get really frustrated because, like we've made marijuana use so innocuous and accessible through pens and legalization. And I'm not for the criminalization of drugs, but we made this thing into this kind of really innocuous thing. But we have the brain science on alcohol and THC is in. Alcohol ravages the brain. THC and cocaine triple ravage the brain. THC destroys the brain. Okay, so I don't want to. Dr. Amen talks about Daniel Amen. You don't want to create a problem to solve a problem, right? So I'm for anything where people can experience when you have somebody that's using self-medicating through whether it's an illicit drug or illicit drug often you're creating a problem to solve a problem. You're changing a brain to feel better, right? I don't like any of that. If you can remediate the system without creating another problem. So the invisible machine, we call it that, is because it's a simple mousetrap-like mechanism that exists between your stellate ganglion in your neck and your brain. And it's a machine, and it's invisible, but it's not really invisible. It's only invisible if you have the wrong scanner. If I were to take you and somebody that had these symptoms, and I were to scan their brain with a functional MRI, I would see that increase in norepinephrine in their brain, and I would see overactivity in the amygdala. I could do this treatment on them over 2 days. And of course, we have those levels go up and down, and we have amygdala activity that goes up and down. But if you do this on a comprehensive data set, it accounts for those fluctuations.
And it generally maintains itself like a year out, 2 years out.
Yeah, generally it can last forever.
Yeah.
But there's epigenetic factors. If you come from, if you grew up in epigenetic poverty, you might have to go back and get it in 3-5 years every time, but maybe then it gets less and less each time. But most of the time, it works with a relative level of permanence.
And so, Jamie, this is a fantastic amount of work that you're doing, and I guess you're still working on the documentary, but is there anything else you're looking forward to doing, like going forward as an artist, as a creator, like something on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, right now, again, last thing on the Invisible Machine, Holly Lawrence was the collaborative writer that really helped put this together and make this book work. But the last thing I'll say on the Invisible Machine is, and before I move on to my next projects that I really care about, is I want people to understand what is going on inside their body when they feel a certain way. This book covers that, and it reads like a novel, and it's packed with science, so that you can understand what's going on in your body and the body of people around you. I think and I give Holly all the credit in the world for this. Holly Lawrence, the book does that. in a way that's better than any book that I think is out there. I just don't think there's been a book that's covered it in a way that where you can't read this book and know that at the end. So I want people to know what's going on inside them and the people that they care about. So that's why I would urge you to read it. And again, it reads like it could be a movie. Okay. And so, but again, my publisher published a China study, which is probably one of the most successful science and health books of all time. They're known for pop science and health, and they're a juggernaut in that field. But what I'm working on now is I'm working on a redesign of the fine art industry. So I'm creating a very elite global digital art gallery. But basically, I have a lot of
this is NFTs. Is that what you're saying?
No. I'm not interested in NFTs. No NFTs. Practical, physical, tangible, touchable art. Mostly visual art and sculpture. But basically, like The Iconist, my first book, covers the what I call the primal laws as to why we notice things, what magnetizes attention, whether it's a story, a book, a visual image, design, business. It shows people how to magnetize attention based on primal laws of human perception. So now what I'm working on is it's easier to become a professional soccer player in Europe or join the NBA or the NFL than it is to become an artist, in the sense that if you want to be in the NFL or the NBA or a soccer player, there's a path. It's a hard path.
Yeah.
You have to stand out in high school, Div 1 school, there's a draft, but there's steps. Okay. Most of my friends that are successful artists, whether they're actors, directors, painters, and that are at the highest level in the world, they didn't go to Parsons. They didn't go to RISD. Most of them barely finished high school. There's no path for an artist. So I've got a book that's
Do we want there to be? Because the path would be just corrupted, wouldn't it?
No, if I give the artist the path themselves, it's almost like it's an extension of the artist way, which is the internal work. This is the external work.
Oh.
And it allows an artist to find their coordinates. So I'm turning that into a school and also a digital gallery for those that make it through the school.
Like a school course, like a course.
A school, basically, it's a school.
Amazing.
And it'll help art, because every artist has different goals. Some artists would be happy selling work for $10,000 or $20,000 in Beverly Hills and Santa Fe, New Mexico. Some people want to be with museums and collectors. So it allows artists to find what they want to do as an artist, musician, sculptor, architect, and then plot a course based on their goals. So it gives artists this coordinates so that they can plot, so that they can have certainty. And why it's important for artists is because, and again, this is a business that will eventually be a book. Why? So anybody that's interested in this can reach out to me on my website, Iconist, iconist.ltd. But what is when artists aren't able to achieve their goals or their dreams, Benjamin, it's hard on them. They invert and they get involved in all sorts of crazy self-destructive behavior. So I want to make the fine art world, which has become like Pizza the Hut from Spaceballs. Fine art world is eating itself with its idiocy. And we're not seeing the best artists because of how exclusionary it is.
Yeah.
Like when I think of poverty, I don't think like all these people out here of all these suffering people that just need someone to come save them. When you grow up in a neighborhood, it's just as complex and diverse as Beverly Hills. So when I think of poverty, I think of lost genius, engineering genius,
untapped
musical
potential.
Genius, untapped potential for the society.
Yeah.
We need to help. We need to even things out because we have a genius pool we're not using.
Yeah.
Okay, that's how I see it. But so that's what I'm working on is to get the fine art world to understand what it is and to redesign it. We needed 50 years ago, we needed to get everyone into a gallery for the most important artists in New York City because we didn't have the internet. Now the most elite gallery in the world doesn't need a physical space. So I'm curating that right now. I have 5 artist residencies scaling to shows of 40 giant paintings each, 5 shows right now that will be the first artists that I've taken from scratch. I mean, they didn't have a style when they met me. and that will be the first people that are part of this
Amazing.
elite gallery that I'm curating. So as a gallery,
Yeah.
as an art director, I am curating a gallery that will change the way that we look at the economics of art.
Yeah. One thing that I've noticed from having a lot of friends and being a humanities major myself, a lot of artist friends, is that they go to art school and they learn all this technique, but whenever it comes to the business part or the practicality part, like it's always incredibly lacking. Like the actual, and that's part of the problem with the academia. It's just all a bunch of people who just end up getting jobs in academia, don't have to make it out on the
They don't
street. So,
teach at art school how to become an artist. All right. So the school that I'm starting in this book that will be coming out in the next few, I don't know when I can get it out.
yeah.
It probably will be my next book. Okay. They're all stacked at this point. Like I have more book, like I don't want to put a book out more than every 3.5 years, or it's like, it starts to become like a joke. But like it's probably going to be the next book. And what it is exactly what you said, Benjamin. It is the practical tools of defining who you are and following a path for an artistic career with certainty, because they don't teach that at art school.
No.
But you can get part of that information from The Iconist, my first book. But this is for artists to give them a set of steps and constructs that they can apply that will have them work with certainty. And I want that relief because it took me way too long, and it was a lot of suffering that I experienced. So I've reverse engineered it.
Yeah.
And like that's how I did everything. Like people sometimes say, "How did you get out of your situation?" And I was really, I like to see myself. I see myself as an escape artist, and I used to say that I Houdini myself out of situations. But really, what I'm doing is I reverse engineered poverty. I reverse engineered book writing. I've reverse engineered books, art, creating art, and I've reverse engineered through all my successful friends across a myriad of mediums and the highest levels of success in the world. There's a pattern that they don't even know they followed, and I've reverse engineered that, and I'm going to be providing that for any artist that wants it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Jamie, it was so great to meet you, to hear the story. The Invisible Machine, like, is just fantastic work. I've been speaking with Corey about this for a while, and he's just the testimonies that he's given me working on the documentary.
The Invisible
Machine, phenomenal.
The Invisible Machine, the startling truth about trauma and the scientific breakthrough that can transform your life.
Yeah. Excellent. And I'll include links to all your different amazing projects down in the description. Thank you so much for your time. It was excellent to speak with you.
This was an amazing interview, Benjamin. It's different than anything I've ever done. You caught me off guard. I thought we weren't even doing the interview yet, and I was already 20 minutes in. I just want to thank you on a personal level for something that, I didn't sleep very well last night, and I thought, God, what's this going to be?
Oh.
and
you're not used to all this media stuff, even though
no, I'm kind of used to it, but like I've never. And I do unusual interviews every once in a while. And when I do, I make sure I say to the host, hey, this one was a little different, Thank you. But no, this was one of the most extraordinary conversations I've ever had, because it didn't feel like an interview. It felt like you tripped on me at the bar and started talking to me and started recording me without telling me. So for that reason, I thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I'll end the record. I'm going to end the recording now, so I'll tell you that's over.
Got it.
Thank you.